Good evening. It's India versus Pakistan at the International Court of Justice at The Hague. India's legal team, led by Deepak Mittal, made a strong case for Jadhav's release today, followed by the Pakistani side presenting more arguments in an already weak case that Islamabad has been pushing. On this special edition of Gravitas, we bring you the most comprehensive lowdown on what happened today. Over the next 90 minutes, you'll see live reports from The Hague, the arguments and how much water they hold, how the ICJ functions, the erosion of Pakistan's credibility, the Iran angle in the story, and where this case goes from here. I'm Palki Sharma Upadhyay. The headlines this Monday. The cyber attack that hit 150 countries slows down with some reports of fresh attacks in Asia and Europe. Russian President Putin says his country had nothing to do with it. It's the Congress versus the White House in the US. Lawmakers asked President Trump to turn over tapes of conversations with fired FBI Chief James Comey days after the president cited such tapes to warn Comey against talking to the media. Pakistan Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif likely to meet US President Donald Trump on the sidelines of the US Arab Islamic Summit this month. Efforts underway to arrange a bilateral, say reports. Malaysia seizes 330 smuggled exotic tortoises worth $300,000. Customs foil an attempt to smuggle hundreds of endangered animals from Madagascar. Today was the first day of the ICJ hearing on India's case against Pakistan, giving a death sentence to former naval officer and businessman Kulbhushan Jadhav. Here's a look at the highlights, the arguments presented by India and Pakistan's counter.
Pursuant to the bilateral agreement between India and Pakistan of 2008, which India is anxious to avoid any reference to, the question of access to Commander Jadhav would be decided on the merits.
These facts establish beyond a shadow of a doubt that the trial was conducted without informing the accused of his rights under the Vienna Convention, without granting consular access to India, and denying the accused and India to arrange for legal representation.
The jurisdiction under the Vienna Convention of 1963 is not as untrammeled as my learned friend has suggested. It is limited.
Article 1 of the optional protocol reads thus, and I quote, "Disputes arising out of the interpretation or application of the Convention shall lie within the compulsory jurisdiction of the International Court of Justice and may accordingly be brought before the court by an application made by any party to the dispute being a party to the present protocol."
Unfortunately, the court was not provided with the substantive material which was given to India on the 23rd of January 2017, but it has now.
India's position has been and continues to be that Jadhav was kidnapped from Iran and appears to have been framed based upon a confession extracted from him when he was in military custody. The allegations of Pakistan lack credibility, particularly in the absence of consular access being provided, by which India would have been able to understand the circumstances of Jadhav's presence in Pakistan.
And joining us with more on this to put this in perspective, what was said at the International Court of Justice, we have with us Surabhi Ranganathan. She's a fellow at the Lauterbach Centre for International Law, joining us from London this evening. Also Cameron Miles, who's an international law expert, also with us from London. Good evening to both of you. Surabhi, what do you make of today's proceedings?
Well, I have to confess, I haven't had a chance to watch the proceedings in toto. So all I know about them is what I've read in terms of the updates that various news channels have been putting up. But I want to say two things. One is that today's proceedings were entirely about provisional measures, and everything we've heard is in line with that. Usually provisional measures are they're not decisions on jurisdiction, they're not decisions on the merits. All that the court has to look into is whether a few factors are made out, including whether there's probable jurisdiction, whether the merits are probably made out, and whether there is a need to grant provisional measures, whether there's a modicum of urgency in the case, and whether the circumstances warrant the granting of provisional measures. And so all of the arguments we seem to have heard today, which focused on urgency, which focused on showing that, or on the discussion of whether or not India's case was meritorious, entirely focused on helping the court decide whether measures should be granted. So that's one. The other thing I want to say is that I was actually quite relieved, based on everything I've read, to see that some of the arguments that were floating around in the media all of the last week were not actually pleaded before the court. So there was no argument made as to suggest that the court does not have jurisdiction in the present case. And that's a good thing, because the court does have jurisdiction. There's no question about that.
Right. Cameron, you have written extensively about this case. What do you think of India's progress so far?
Well, it's very difficult to say. As Sarabi mentioned, what we're dealing with here is an application for provisional measures. As Sarabi also mentioned, provisional measures are about an injunction, a temporary halt to actions between the parties to ensure that the dispute doesn't get any worse and irreparable harm doesn't happen to India's case on the facts. And in this circumstance, that would presumably be the execution of Mr. Jadhav. It's very difficult to say at this stage with any degree of certainty, pending proper presentation of the facts of the case, which will occur further down the line, how India has progressed the matter. But I would say that based on the arguments that have been put forward, both presently and in other cases of this kind, it must be remembered that this is not the first time that a case under Article 36 of the Vienna Convention on Consular Relations has been brought. In previous cases, and I'm thinking of three in particular, one between Paraguay and the United States, and two further ones between Germany and the United States and Mexico and the United States, all three claimants in that case, of course, Paraguay, Mexico, and Germany, were successful in obtaining interim relief that would have, had that interim relief been complied with, resulted in ensuring that the nationals of those three countries would have had execution stayed pending outcome of the case.
Right. Compliance is something that we have to look at. But Surabhi, if we were to focus solely on the arguments made by Pakistan today, one of them was that there was no cooperation with India. And arguments like these hold no water given the fact that India asked for consular access 16 times. The Pakistani counsel then went on to say that the military court in Pakistan is not a kangaroo court. But given the fact that nobody knows when the trial happened, how it proceeded, what kind of help Jadhav got, these are questionable claims, to say the least.
So, okay, two things. Firstly, the Pakistan claim is correct to the extent that they're saying that the court does not have jurisdiction to decide on the merits or otherwise of Pakistan's domestic trial. The jurisdiction under Article 36 of the Vienna Convention on Consular Relations, read with the optional protocol, only allows the court to look at possible breaches of that convention. It doesn't allow the court to look at what might have happened in the trial in Pakistan. So in that sense, those arguments are more or less irrelevant for our purposes. They're not really part of what the court will decide on. The second issue is, of course, that of whether or not the Vienna Convention on Consular Relations is breached. We will hear many more arguments on that at the merit stage. Prima facie, the argument that Pakistan is making is that because there is a bilateral agreement with India also on consular relations, the Vienna Convention does not apply. All I can say at this point is that, yes, that's something that the court will look at, but on the face of it, there doesn't seem to be a lot of merit in the argument. If you read the agreement, it doesn't seem to show any indication of excluding the Vienna Convention on Consular Relations, but rather seems additional to it. The object and purpose of that agreement is stated very clearly. It's meant to expedite consular access. It's supposed to make it easier for the two countries to exchange details about the prisoners they might have, and so forth. It doesn't seem to go against the Vienna Convention. This is not a treaty conflict.
Right. Cameron Miles, I want to discuss with you this particular point a bit further. The Pakistani counsel seemed to suggest that the Vienna Convention does not apply in cases of espionage. Even if we were to agree that this was a case of espionage, is that a fair argument to make?
I would have some doubts as to whether or not that's accurate. Article 36 of the Vienna Convention, the law of treaties, is relatively clear in that circumstance. And I don't think that there's anything particular in the wording of that treaty that would indicate in cases of espionage that there's somehow an exception there. if Pakistan was to be successful in making that argument, it would somehow have to imply it into the words of the treaty. Indeed, it's possible to argue, I suppose, that in cases of espionage, it's even more important that consular access be granted to ensure that somebody who's in the employ of the state in question is afforded every possible right that's available to them. But that will be a matter for the court, and the court will have to determine that in due course. All that I can say at the moment is, on the wording of Article 36 of the Vienna Convention, I can't see any cause to have that particular argument.
Surabhi, would you say that India has made a compelling case so far?
So look, again, India's case so far has dealt with simply the question of provisional measures, whether the court should grant provisional measures or not. As Cameron has noted, there have been 3 previous cases that have been more or less similar in facts. In every one of those cases, provisional measures were indicated. To that extent, I would think India has quite a strong case for that point. After that, there is a lot more to be said. I mean, we are still waiting for written submissions from both sides, on a full written submission from both sides on jurisdiction, on merits. It's only once we have those submissions that we'll be able to say with greater certainty which claim is the more meritorious. So far as provisional measures are concerned, yes, I believe India has made a good case.
Right. And Cameron, where do things go from here now? We do not know when the court is going to meet again. How do things proceed from here?
Well, provisional measures applications are urgent processes within the court's jurisdiction. So when an application of this kind comes in, the court will usually be motivated to determine whether or not provisional measures should be granted very quickly. The current record holder in that regard was a previous Vienna Convention on Consular Relations case, in which provisional measures were granted within 24 hours of the argument in question. Now, I'm not saying that's the case that's going to be here. I'm not saying that's what's going to happen here, but you could expect the court to decide on this particular issue within, I would say, a month to 6 weeks of this, if not sooner. After that, the court will have to consider whether or not to bifurcate. Now, when I say bifurcation, what I mean is that Pakistan is going to put forward several arguments on jurisdiction. The court will have to determine whether or not it wants to hear those arguments separately from the merits. And if it does, it will have a separate hearing on jurisdiction. Now, if it has that separate hearing, that can be expected to take place within, I would say, depending on the pleadings, 6 to 8 months. And then after that, there will be a further hearing on the merits themselves, after which the court will order its final judgment. So they say that the wheels of justice grind very slowly, very finely. I would say that it will take in this circumstance at least a year before the court is willing to offer final judgment on that particular case. But that's by no means outside the ordinary for international law.
So, Surabhi, would that effectively mean that there is a stay on any kind of sentencing of Kulbhushan Jadhav by the Pakistani authorities until the ICJ decides this case? And this is something that we're saying on the premise that no action has been taken against him already, because India has seen no proof of life so far.
See, there isn't a stay yet. So far, all we have is a communication, an urgent communication from the president of the ICJ to the government of Pakistan saying that they should not proceed, they should not act in any way that would make any possible provisional measures that could be indicated pointless. So that's not a stay in itself. The outcome of today's hearing might well amount to a stay, in that Pakistan will be asked not to carry out the sentence that they have already passed, pending final determination of the dispute. We'll have to wait, as Cameron noted, for some while, for at least a week, possibly 4 to 6 weeks, to find out if indeed the court is willing to indicate those provisional measures. And then, yes, there will be a stay. But there isn't a stay at present.
All right. I do appreciate you both joining us, Surabhi Ranganathan, Cameron Miles, and putting things in perspective for the layperson. And a lot of people in India, of course, are interested in which way this case is going. So thanks, I appreciate you joining us. This is also a case that, as I said, is being tracked very closely, both in India and in Pakistan. Let's take a look at some reactions that came in earlier today.
Till such time as a measured decision is taken, especially since the ICJ is now incisive of the matter, no precipitate action by Pakistan can or should be allowed to be done, and for that purpose, whatever orders the ICJ passes must be to preserve the status quo till such time as the matter is decided. I think India has a strong case, and we all, as Indians, the entire country hopes and prays that things work out well at the ICJ.
No, I think, as has been reiterated time and again by the Ministry of External Affairs and the other sources in the government is determined to ensure that justice is done to Jadhav. He is a concern of the government, concern of the entire Indian nation, and I'm sure India will be able to prevail with its view, with its opinion on the subject.
Kulbhushan Yadav issue, there is no doubt that it has been conducted, and the trial that was done in Pakistan appeared to be more of a kangaroo court proceedings. Military court went ahead and immediately pronounced a judgment. Lawyers are not being allowed to defend him. Messages have gone in that. Pakistan, despite being a signatory of the Vienna Convention, is choosing to not follow the procedure that is mandated on them and mandatory of them. Government of India is very, very firmly putting across our point of view on all of these grounds through Mr. Harish Salve, senior advocate, and we believe that it's a strong case that the International Court of Justice will take cognizance of.
My expectation basically from ICJ is they should take a fact note each and everything, the way it has been planted on Kulbhushan ji. They should take note of that, and in fact they should pass a judgment on his release.
Well, this is not just a battle for justice for an Indian national in Pakistan. At stake is India's pride in an international court of law, and the government has put together a crack team of legal and diplomatic minds to fight for the country's cause. Here's a lowdown on Team India at the ICJ. The Indian side is being led by this man. Deepak Mittal is the Joint Secretary, Pakistan, Afghanistan, Iran, in the Ministry of External Affairs. He is India's principal agent. He joined the IFS in 1998 and has served in Bangladesh, Egypt, Israel and Vietnam. He served in the Prime Minister's office from 2014 to 2016 and has been tasked with opening and closing India's arguments.
Honorable members of the court, it is indeed a great honor for me to appear today before this august court on behalf of the Republic of India as India's agent at the oral hearings on India's request for indication of provisional measures in the proceedings instituted by India against the Islamic Republic of Pakistan on 8 May 2017.
Next comes the co-agent. V.D. Sharma is the Joint Secretary in the MEA in the Legal and Treaties Department, a man who understands the law and its application in the international context. Harish Salve is India's counsel, the man who put together and voiced India's arguments in the case. Salve is a veteran lawyer and has served as Solicitor General of India. He has been part of several high-profile cases like the Bilkis Bano case, the Vodafone tax dispute, the KG Basin gas dispute, and the Salman Khan hit-and-run case, among others.
The Vienna Convention recognizes the right of a state to seek redress on behalf of its national in this court, where the rights of its national and concomitantly its own rights under the Vienna Convention are violated by another state.
Kajal Bhatt, First Secretary at the Embassy of India in the Netherlands, is part of the team in an advisory capacity. Dr. Bhatt heads the legal team at the Indian Embassy. And finally, Chetna N. Rai, who is part of the team as a junior counsel. The Pakistani team is being led by Attorney General Ashtar Osaf, along with senior lawyer Asad Rahim. Bureau Report, WION. These are the people who put forth arguments today. Before we take this discussion forward, let's play out for you some more statements made by India and the counter that Pakistan presented at the ICJ earlier today.
There were 4 stages of the trial, 21st of September to the 12th of February 2017. The clemency process was identified clearly, the timeline, 90 days plus 60 days.
It is facetious on the one hand to allege in public pronouncements, including at the level of the advisor to the Prime Minister, that Jadhav has been convicted for serious offences against the state. And on the other hand, to point out remedies by way of seeking clemency in its communication to this court.
So how is Pakistan looking at today's proceedings? Let's go straight to Taha Siddiqui, WION's Pakistan Bureau Chief, joining us from Islamabad. Good evening, Taha. What are the reactions? How, according to the Pakistani authorities, have their lawyers done on day one?
Well, as a lot was expected from them is what came out basically, and that's what we've been hearing here also in Pakistan. That I mean, there was a complete media blackout as far as the Indian side of the versions was concerned. They didn't really broadcast it or stream it or even have them are quoting people from the Indian side, the Indian team, saying whatever their defense was. The only defense that is being reported here is the Pakistani side and the Pakistani team's version, and in that, basically, I mean, the whole issue of the narrative or the conversation here is about the fact that Kulbhushan Yadav is once again exposed internationally. Once again, we've managed to tell the world that he was part of a terrorist network and he was involved in terrorist activities, anti-Pakistan activities, and his conviction and his video confession. All of that has been repeated mostly in Pakistan. Most of the people you talk to, they have this version, or they're just telling the side of the Pakistanis and being pretty confident about it in some ways, saying that Pakistan was able to present its case internationally about India's state-sponsored terrorism. So that's more or less of the narrative here when we speak to people.
Right. Mandy Clark, WION's London Bureau Chief, someone who's been tracking this case and bringing us live reports from the ICJ all day today, is also joining us live. Good evening, Mandy. So the versions coming from India and Pakistan obviously are biased towards the narrative that respective countries are following. But it is being said that the Indian Council's urgent brief to the ICJ registrar for 20 minutes tilted the case to a certain extent in India's favor, in that the ICJ president sent a communication to Pakistan to hold the sentencing of Kulbhushan Jadhav. How do legal experts see this case and the way the progress it's making?
Well, where I was speaking to one legal person in the Hague, and they made it clear that where India's strong suit in their case is this Vienna Convention that both parties have signed on to, and the argument that Kulbhushan Jadhav didn't get legal counsel, and that is it's a very narrow definition that the judges are looking at, but it's definitely in the convention. It's a part that the judges can rule whether if he didn't, then they would require they could push Pakistan for that. So that's where they feel like it's the strong suit in the Indian argument of the case.
And what happens next, Mandy? Now, both sides were given 90 minutes each to present their side of the argument. That was done today. What's happening tomorrow or the day after? Where does the case go?
Well, what's interesting is when Pakistan was given their 90 minutes, they found out very late in the day that they could not provide the alleged confession. And so in the end, they only used up 60 minutes, so an hour of their 90 minutes that they were given. But now that both sides have been presented, the judges are taking all the evidence and they're going to consider it. The court has closed for the day, so that means there will be no decision today. What's going to happen next is the International Court of Justice will put a notification, press release, stating that there will be a hearing. They generally give you at least a day warning to note that they are making a decision, and then whether it's one day or a couple of days, they will announce their decision. This case is seen as very urgent, so it's unlikely to drag on for weeks or months. It will likely happen within days.
On what grounds, Mandy, for our viewers who haven't followed proceedings minute by minute, was Pakistan's what it calls the confession of Kulbhushan Jadhav, on what grounds did the court say that this will not be presented as part of their arguments? And did the Pakistan team see it as a setback to their case?
Well, the announcement actually came from the opening statements of Pakistan. We only knew that Pakistan was planning to use that confession because during the break, first India presented their case, then there was a break and they were doing audio tests of the alleged confession. And it was quite clear that the Pakistani team was planning to use it, but the court, all 11 judges, had viewed the footage and deemed it inappropriate and requested the Pakistani defense team not to use it. So they would have only been given hours to have made that, and to have realized they couldn't use it and didn't have enough time to add anything into their defense.
Right, Mandy and Taha, I'm going to request you both to stay with us. We have to take a very quick break. We'll come with more updates on this, reporting live from The Hague and giving you all the analysis on what this case means and where it's going. Welcome back. You're watching Gravitas, and this is a special edition as we track the latest developments at the International Court of Justice. For those of our viewers tuning in just now, we are taking you through the day's proceedings, bringing you the highlights and also breaking it down for you. What do the arguments mean? Where does India stand? And how has the court taken the Pakistani version? Let's take a look at the arguments made by both sides today.
Pursuant to the bilateral agreement between India and Pakistan of 2008, which India is anxious to avoid any reference to, the question of access to Commander Jadhav would be decided on the merits.
These facts establish beyond a shadow of a doubt that the trial was conducted without informing the accused of his rights under the Vienna Convention, without granting consular access to India, and denying the accused and India to arrange for legal representation.
The jurisdiction under the Vienna Convention of 1963 is not as untrammeled as my learned friend has suggested. It is limited.
Article 1 of the optional protocol reads thus, and I quote, "Disputes arising out of the interpretation or application of the Convention shall lie within the compulsory jurisdiction of the International Court of Justice and may accordingly be brought before the court by an application made by any party to the dispute being a party to the present protocol."
Unfortunately, the court was not provided with the substantive material which was given to India on the 23rd of January 2017, but it has now.
India's position has been and continues to be that Jadhav was kidnapped from Iran and appears to have been framed based upon a confession extracted from him when he was in military custody. The allegations of Pakistan lack credibility, particularly in the absence of consular access being provided, by which India would have been able to understand the circumstances of Jadhav's presence in Pakistan.
There were 4 stages of the trial, 21st of September to the 12th of February 2017. The clemency process was identified clearly, the timeline, 90 days plus 60 days.
It is facetious on the one hand to allege in public pronouncements, including at the level of the advisor to the Prime Minister, that Jadhav has been convicted for serious offences against the state, and on the other hand to point out remedies by way of seeking clemency in its communication to this court.
And WION Taha Siddiqui from Islamabad and Mandy Clark from The Hague continue to be with us. Taha, it's often been said in the Pakistani press and people we've spoken to that Pakistan was taken by surprise, that it did not see India's application at The Hague coming, and so it did not get enough time to prepare its case. Is there a certain sense of nervousness?
Well, that's what they keep on saying repeatedly. The Attorney General of Pakistan, Ashtar Osaf, who's heading the legal team, and he was supposed to be there, but then last minute just to his plan. But he sent his legal team, and he's in constant touch with the legal team. And he says that very little time was given to Pakistan to sort of create its defense and talk about be research on what defense to be used. But in the sense that, I mean, we've seen that, Yadav happened 2016. Pakistan has been saying these similar things that they said today at the court hearing. Nothing new was said that we hadn't already heard of. So in that sense, I mean, that's one of the tactics that they wanted to use and one of the messages that they want to give over there. As far as whether or not they're nervous here in Pakistan, the team here, or the Pakistani state or the government with regards to this whole case, I don't see that, and I don't see anyone talking about that. More or less, they know Kulbhushan Yadav is in their custody, and they have this whole narrative around him in the sense of, as we were discussing earlier, about state-sponsored terrorism, his alleged involvement in that. So all of that is what they're focusing on, and this factor that we didn't have enough time was more of a tactic in the courts than at home back here for the domestic audience.
Right. And Mandy, you spoke to Harish Salve, India's counsel. What did he tell you about how he sees India's chances?
He didn't give away too much. He felt he presented a very strong case. He didn't respond to Pakistan's, when questioned what he thought of Pakistan's defense. What he did say is it's up to the courts to decide. He felt like his case was robust and India should win the case, but he said really ultimately it's up to the judges.
Right. Mandy Clark, Taha, thank you very much. Taha, I'm going to request you to stay with us. Mandy, waiting for more live reports coming from The Hague as we track this case very closely. This is not just a legal battle. This is also a diplomatic fight between two countries. And Pakistan's credibility, already low given its support of international terrorism and Islamic militancy, has probably suffered more knocks with Kulbhushan Jadhav. In fact, his abduction from Iran was an illegal act to start with. Iran reportedly demanded that it be allowed to question Jadhav, and then subsequently there was a change in Iran's position. Whatever triggered that change of mind, the question mark on Pakistan's charges against Jadhav has very much been put. But it is Pakistan's conduct with respect to India that violates every canon of international law, as various legal experts have said on this channel and other platforms. It's important to remind our viewers that Jadhav is a retired naval officer and an Indian citizen. He was doing legitimate business in Iran. None other than Sartaj Aziz, Pakistan's advisor on international affairs, admitted last December that the evidence against Jadhav was insufficient. There was kidnapping, there was a secret trial that everyone is now talking about, yet he was kidnapped and forcibly taken to Pakistan. He was falsely accused of being a spy. India's request for consular access to Jadhav was refused not once, not twice, but an unprecedented 16 times by Pakistan. And Jadhav's trial was done in complete secrecy. There is no indication that he was given any legal representation at all, let alone consular access.
जो अपील 40 दिन के अंदर दर्ज करनी थी वो आज मैंने दर्ज की है पाकिस्तान के फॉरेन सेक्रेटरी साहिबा के साथ। तो अपील जो है जो 40 दिन के अंदर दर्ज होनी थी वो हमने की है, और हम ये चाहते हैं कि कुलभूषण जाधव को जल्दी से जल्दी रिहा कर दिया जाए।
Taha Siddiqui continues to be with us. Taha, is there also a realization that Pakistan's credibility is eroding further as it presents this case? Of course, no one will come on record and say that, but there is some clear violation of the international law happening here.
Well, definitely. I mean, the way they've gone with the case and progressed with the case, there are organizations, even in Pakistan, human rights observers and human rights lawyers that I've spoken to, and everybody has been asking about one of the things that which has not been discussed in the media though, but has been repeatedly comes amongst international human rights observers in Pakistan or internationally, is that the fair trial aspect of it and whether or not Pakistan is being fair with this whole process and with this whole case. But little of that is discussed on mainstream media. Little of that is discussed within the policy circles. And I mean, with this whole case is being led by the military. Civilians are on one side, so in that sense, the military is managing, and with given the fact that military is very Indian-centric, they're using it for their own sort of narrative building that we keep on seeing in Pakistan with regards to India. So in that sense, I mean, we see this military sort of being in charge of all the affairs, and they don't really care about this international sort of pressure, especially from India. I mean, in the sense, even if you look at the US and the relationship Pakistan and US has had, or Afghanistan has had, there is a lot of pressure on Pakistan to mend its ways, to correct its ways with regards to other international obligations it has. But doesn't really, here domestically, the narrative is totally different, and that doesn't become the part of the debate as such.
Right. Also joining us this evening is Michael Kugelman, Senior Associate for South Asia at the Woodrow Wilson Center from Washington. Good evening, Michael. Last week, we were talking about how the US pulled up Pakistan and held it responsible for worsening ties with India. And today we see the arguments made by the Pakistan Council at the International Court of Justice. Is all of this further diminishing Pakistan's credibility internationally?
Well, I think that India has presented a pretty strong case in the hearing today. The fact that it was drawing on a number of legal precedents over the years to point to the fact that, among other things, Jadhav deserves consular access. People should be able to see him. I don't know if what this actually means for Pakistan's image and how it's seen, but I would actually contend, contrary to what we'd heard from another guest earlier, that Pakistan does worry about its image, and it knows that it has a credibility problem, to say the least. And I think now that you've had a very well-respected court weigh in on this case, and well, actually the court hasn't weighed in yet, but you had a hearing. India and Pakistan have argued their cases, and it does seem pretty clear that there's reason to believe that there are things that Pakistan should be doing that it's not doing. That India has a pretty strong case, but it really comes down to two very basically contradictory narratives. I mean, the Indians say that this person is not a spy. The Pakistanis say that he is, and that in that sense, that makes both of the arguments that we've heard really cancel each other out. And at the end of the day, not much has really changed. And we'll have to see what happens in the next few months. If Pakistan does provide Jadhav an opportunity to make a case for what's happened to him, that would entail Pakistan actually providing legal counsel to him. Whether that happens, we don't know. But I don't think we should suggest we shouldn't overstate the significance that this hearing has had for Pakistan and how it's perceived. I mean, here in Washington, I wouldn't go so far as to say that people are transfixed by what was happening in this court hearing today. I think that the government here is thinking about all types of different issues and not necessarily this case. The government hasn't really weighed in on it either. But certainly, I think it does add to this issue of Pakistan and the credibility crisis that it suffers overseas. And given how strong the case was that India made, you do have to wonder how perceptions will differ here in this town and elsewhere when it comes to how folks think about Pakistan.
One of the worries, Michael, in India is that if the court were to come up with an adverse verdict against Pakistan, and if it came to enforcement through the UN channel, Pakistan might ask its friends like China to veto that. Do you think that's a risk that Pakistan would be able to take, given all the damage that would have already been done?
Yeah, that certainly is a possibility, and I'm not a legal scholar, so I can't really weigh in as to what actually that would mean and how much Pakistan could actually ask other countries to come to its aid. But certainly there is a precedent here that when Pakistan feels itself challenged in legal context, it tries to look to its friends that it could really count on, and that does not necessarily mean the United States. it essentially means the likes of China. And you see how China has tried to support the cause of Pakistan in the UN and its related entities over the years. But I don't actually know. It's an interesting question to see if there were to be a verdict that went against Pakistan, how Pakistan would actually respond and what it would try to do to try to build support to its case. But my sense is that Pakistan is going to remain very defiant, and it's not necessarily going to obey the strictures that may come from this court. And, based on what the Pakistani legal representation suggested today, it almost seemed like they weren't even recognizing this court as a legitimate authority. So who knows what will happen? But, Pakistan will, I'm sure, think about going to its best friends if need be, and that would certainly involve the Chinese.
Taha, have you heard anything on this front? Is there an effort to get some sort of international backing to Pakistan's position?
Well, as of yet, what we were hearing in Pakistan was the fact that the case of Kulbhushan Jadhav was not internationalized enough. I spoke to a few people in the Foreign Office and people who have been following the affairs here closely, and they think that basically Pakistan's sort of push, India going to the ICJ gave Pakistan an opportunity to present its case and its sort of narrative that it wasn't been able to broadcast internationally today. And that is what they think happened at ICJ, or they wanted it to happen at ICJ, is to internationalize the issue according to their narrative, which is that, Pakistan is also a victim of India. And that's the bigger picture that they're trying to sell over here. And in that sense, the international, involving other international people, we've seen that actually Pakistan was having a tough time making this issue internationalized and people talk about it. But today, because of the fact that India went, what I am getting to hear is that, it gave Pakistan an opportunity, and they're actually happy about it.
All right. In fact, I'm going to request you both to stay with us. The Jadhav case, as we know, could be the most high profile between India and Pakistan at the International Court of Justice. But the two countries have been there before. Here's a reminder of what happened in earlier cases.
India and Pakistan have faced off at the International Court of Justice before. In 1971, Pakistan went to the ICJ claiming that India had breached the International Civil Aviation Convention and the International Air Services Transit Agreement. India appealed the ICJ with the plea that the organization's council did not have the jurisdiction to decide on Pakistan's complaint. The ICJ dismissed the Indian appeal 14-2. After the Bangladesh war, Pakistan complained to the ICJ that the transfer of 195 Pakistani prisoners of war to Bangladesh was illegal. The case was withdrawn when the two sides signed the New Delhi Agreement the same year. In 1999, Pakistan dragged India to the ICJ after India shot down an Atlantique aircraft of the Pakistan Navy. The ICJ accepted India's reservations about the ICJ's jurisdiction under Article 36(2) in matters involving Commonwealth members. Pakistan's case dismissed for lack of jurisdiction since Pakistan is a member of the Commonwealth. The current case involving Kulbhushan Jadhav is the first high-profile case that's being keenly contested. Bureau Report, WION.
Michael Kugelman, while most foreign policy observers and legal experts have called India's decision to go to the ICJ a masterstroke, some have raised doubts and concerns that this might set a tricky precedent when it comes to India-Pakistan dispute. How do you see that?
Well, I mean, it is significant that, as was stated before, it's been many years since you last had an international court get involved in a dispute like this between India and Pakistan. In some ways it's a good thing. I mean, the India and Pakistan are at such a loggerheads, and there's such a deep stalemate between these two countries we can't expect the relationship is going to improve in a big way between these two countries. And so there's something to be said for, in a case like this, having an outside legal entity get involved. But that said, I think in this case, this works to the benefit of India more than Pakistan, simply because India thinks that it's been wronged and it wants to get international attention, it wants to get international sympathy. What better way to do that than by bringing this case to an international court? Of course, usually, when you look at the India-Pakistan dispute, it's sort of the opposite way around. Pakistan is always insisting on wanting to bring attention to Kashmir, and it wants to get international mediation and international involvement, and has really not been successful at all in that regard. So now the tables are turned, that it's India that wants to bring more attention to what it regards as an injustice and something that's not right, and that it wants to be righted between these two countries. So, it's hard to say if this is a good thing, if it'll ultimately, at the end, benefit India, but at least, we now have, there's an opportunity for India to, put this issue on a broader, more global platform so that more people know what's going on and will want to weigh in on India's side. But, as I said again, at least here in Washington, I don't think people are watching this case with rapt attention, at least not at this point. And I imagine it's probably quite similar in other world capitals as well. But at least India has the opportunity to showcase its grievance, so to speak, and to try to bring more attention to what it thinks is a great miscarriage of justice.
Well, understandably, the US has, at least on 3 occasions, refused to follow the verdict of the ICJ. But Taha, you said that Pakistan sees this as an opportunity. Is this the context you were talking about? That Pakistan has always asked for third-party mediation, and India for once has gone to an international court and internationalized an India-Pakistan dispute?
Definitely. I mean, this is that's what the here people that I've spoken to within the Foreign Office, within the Attorney General's office, the legal team that is representing the Pakistan case at ICJ in Hague, they emphasize on this point continuously that we've been trying with the Kashmir issue. They've made a lot of hue and cry. They've made a lot of noise locally, domestic politics. Even if you remember, at the UN, the Pakistani Prime Minister went and spoke about it, but it doesn't have given any sort of, they haven't been able to internationally talk about the issues Pakistan wants to talk about. And so they have, in a way, spinned this whole Kulbhushan Yadav's case into, on the Indian side, the question is whether he got a fair trial, whether he's a spy or not, and, what are the evidences. On the Pakistan side, the narrative is, as I mentioned again before, is that he's a spy, he's involved in anti-state activities, and this is one thing that Pakistan has always wanted to go outside, and especially in Balochistan, where it has troubled location and troubled geography, and because of the insurgency there, they want to sort of show that the insurgency is not real, and so they're using this for a number of things as an opportunity. China is investing into Balochistan, so to also play that against the whole China-India relationship and say, look, what's happening in Balochistan is because of what India is doing. And then internationally, in the West, this topic comes up, and they talk about how India it's just not Pakistan with the militant problem, right, or with these militant networks. So all of that is something that is why it is being looked upon as an opportunity here.
The other very important question, of course, in this case is Kulbhushan Jadhav a pawn then in a larger struggle? It is speculated that the Pakistani army kidnapped Jadhav with the objective of putting the civilian government of Nawaz Sharif on the back foot. He has a brief history of such behavior on the part of the army in Pakistan.
In April 1979, a military government in Pakistan hanged a duly elected prime minister. Zulfikar Ali Bhutto's public popularity and political charisma counted for nothing as the military went ahead, charged him with conspiring to murder a political opponent. They ignored international protests and hanged him. It was testimony to the power of the Pakistani military that no case was ever brought against the army for what was an act of political murder. In fact, Pakistani politicians bend over backwards to befriend the military, this to accommodate its interests even at the cost of democracy. There is a view that the Kulbhushan Jadhav controversy was deliberately created by the army. This was done to show the civilians their place. It was to remind them that India's policy is to preserve of the military, that dialogue with India in peace on the line of control isn't permissible. This directly feeds into the Army's policy of giving sanctuary to terrorist and militant groups. Policy towards Afghanistan is also made by the Army, which also has a hand in policy toward the US and China, and of course control over nuclear weapons. It is said that the Kargil War was pursued by then President Pervez Musharraf without any reference to Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif. He was only involved later, after the Army's plans were well advanced. Bureau Report, WION.
Michael Kugelman, this takes us to the old question when it comes to Pakistan. Who are we dealing with? And is this so much about India and Pakistan as about the Pakistan army versus the civilian government?
Well, yeah, this is always a question worth asking when it comes to Pakistan. In terms of who we're dealing with, the Pakistani military certainly remains in charge behind the scenes. That's never been in doubt. I think that at this point, the military is so strong behind the scenes that there really isn't necessarily an ongoing tiff between the civilians and the military. Though certainly there have been some incidents that have cropped up over the last few months that make it clear that there are still is pushback. Though I would contend that Prime Minister Sharif is not as willing to push back as he used to be, as when he was prime minister in previous years. I think that he may be a bit more resigned to just accepting things as they are and agreeing to take a subservient role to the military. You make a good point about whether this gentleman involved in this case, Jadhav, what exactly he is, if he's a pawn. I would contend that bargaining chip may be a better term. I've never really thought that Pakistan intended or intends to execute him. I could be wrong, but my sense is that the Pakistani army, the security establishment, derives a fair amount of clout. I mean, not necessarily clout, but it could really use him as an asset. And if it builds up the possibility that could it execute him, maybe the Pakistani military believes that it could try to get something back in return from India in order to grant him freedom, or at least to prevent him from being executed. Because clearly, Pakistanis have done everything possible to try to build up a strong case for this guy. It's not coincidental that a top leader of the Pakistani Taliban was all of a sudden, we're told by Pakistan, surrendered and made a confession in which he implicated RAW in all types of activities working together with the Pakistani Taliban. Clearly, I think the intention there was to try to strengthen the case against Jadhav and to suggest that he was working openly with militants and was trying to do all these terrible things in Pakistan. So clearly the Pakistanis want to build up a narrative that this guy is certainly a spy and has done terrible things. But what that actually means beyond that, if they really intend to follow through and execute him, I'm not necessarily sure. I think that the security establishment in Pakistan feels that it could generate some significant benefits just by dangling the possibility, and to make India really worry about that execution, that the possibility is there that it could come.
Taha, Michael Kugelman said a bargaining chip, and I come back to the question, who are they bargaining with? The government of India or the Pakistani civilian government? Because let's admit it, it did put the Nawaz Sharif government in a spot right after Sartaj Aziz said that there isn't enough evidence against him, and Pakistan could have done without more confrontation with India at this point.
Well, as far as, just that statement from, Sartaj Aziz is concerned, he retracted it later on. He said I was misquoted. But anyway, as far as, whether or not this is a civilian military issue in Pakistan, we do see that, in the sense that there's been a lot of pressure, and from what I understand, there's been a lot of pressure from the military towards the civilians for talking about this issue, politicizing this issue, and there has been resistance from the civilians, and to that effect, even the political opposition, for example, the People's Party or the Pakistan Tehreek-e-Insaf, which are the two parties in the parliament, biggest opposition to the ruling elite, to the ruling party of Nawaz Sharif. They have also even talked about the civilian being muted about this case, and why are we not talking about this Indian atrocity in the country and all that. So in that sense, we've seen that this has been used in a way with the civil military imbalance that exists in the country, and to pressurize the Nawaz government into further sort of backing out of this peace overtures that he has always been hinting at, or always been saying, and has always been reaching out, even recently with the whole Jindal case of him visiting. So in that sense, but also at the same time, I mean, another bargaining chip that we have been hearing about on and off is about this swapping of a spy sort of procedure, but that's speculative. But there has been this report of this colonel who went missing in Nepal, and the Pakistani media has been saying that he was picked up by the Indian intelligence agency in a similar way that India is talking about Kulbhushan Jadhav being picked up in Iran. So there has been some talk of that bargaining chip also with India, of swapping that. So I mean, yes, it's being used two ways by the military, with the civilians in a different way, and with the Indians in a different way.
Right. Another dimension to the story, of course, is the role of Iran. How does Tehran see this? Can India count on its support, given the fact that Kulbhushan Jadhav was abducted by Pakistani authorities from Iranian territory? Here's more. Amid the India-Pakistan tussle over Kulbhushan Jadhav came a report that Iran has sought his custody. Iranian Consul General Mohammad Rafi reportedly confirmed it in a press conference in Quetta last week. Days later, Iranian ambassador to Pakistan, Mehdi Hunardust, denied that any such request was made, saying Iran has nothing to do with Jadhav. Pakistan's Foreign Affairs Secretary, Tehmina Janjua, said no such request had been received. So how does Iran come into the picture? Because of Chabahar. This is where Pakistani authorities kidnapped and arrested Kulbhushan Jadhav and charged him with espionage in Balochistan. Chabahar, which means 4 seasons, is a port that Iran is developing with help from India. It is on the border with Pakistan. Locals on both sides of this border are Baloch, Sunnis, unlike Shias who dominate the rest of Iran. The border is porous, people cross over and mingle. Not far from Chabahar, Pakistan is developing the Gwadar port in Balochistan with Chinese assistance. It's their gateway to Afghanistan and Central Asia. Evidently, they're not happy about India's stakes in Chabahar. Delhi has also signed up to develop the port and railway line to Zahedan in Iran. Jadhav's arrest and sentencing is part of Pakistan's plan to build pressure on India as it fails to deal with the growing strife in Balochistan. For now, Tehran seems to be playing wait and watch. The killing of 10 guards by militants in a cross-border raid from Pakistan has spiked hostilities. Will this border tension help India's case and give Iran more incentive to help Delhi? Bureau Report, WION. Michael Kugelman, does Iran have a role, and should India look to it for any kind of support or help in bolstering its case?
Well, I don't think Iran is going to try to do Pakistan any favors here. I mean, as your report just noted, there have been some fairly deep tensions between Pakistan and Iran over militancy. Iran has accused Pakistan of essentially providing sanctuary to militants that have crossed over and killed Iranian guards in Iran. So, I think that, and you also have to look at this in the broader context of the sectarian rivalry between the Saudis and the Iranians. Of course, Pakistan has long been quite close to Saudi Arabia, and the fact that you had former Army Chief General Sharif go lead this Saudi-led so-called counter-terror mission, it has not made Iran happy either. So, I imagine that Iran will probably not want to inject itself into this issue. But at the same time, I certainly don't see it going out on a limb trying to help Pakistan, given the state of the relationship between Pakistan and Iran, which is not in deep crisis, but it's certainly one that is a bit volatile, is a bit fraught. And at the end of the day, Iran clearly understands that Pakistan, really leans much more toward the Saudis than it does toward the Iranians.
Taha, does Islamabad feel some pressure on that quarter?
Well, the Iranian embassy has here, the Iranian consulate actually in Quetta, in a press conference with the Consul General talked about, he was asked about Kulbhushan Yadav because repeatedly in Pakistan, Iran has been mentioned with regards to Kulbhushan Yadav now from and that's where he was entering from into Pakistan. So in that sense, Iran has sought access to Kulbhushan Yadav to interrogate him and to question him and to ask him about, as allegedly by Pakistan, he was using the Iranian soil. But also it has led to tension, as you were earlier talking about, in the sense that when the Iranian president visited Pakistan last year, he was basically at that time he met with the military chief, the Rahil Sharif, and at that time the military media released a statement saying that mutual interest conversation happened, and then they talked about like this whole aspect of how Iranian soil is used for terrorism, and Pakistan raised complaints against with Iran about this and to look into it, and then later on from the Iranian side we heard that they were quite upset about it, saying that this conversation never happened. So in that sense, Pakistan has been told by Iran and repeatedly being asked about why they keep on saying that Iran is involved without any proof and asking. But then again, with the whole past relationship that Pakistan has with Iran, and the situation in border recently has not been good on the border also. Iran has been accusing Pakistan of using its soil for militants who are attacking inside Iranian concerns inside Iran. So in that sense, yes, there is pressure from Iran on Pakistan also.
Right. And of course, pressure building from all sides as Pakistan fights what many in India call a losing battle at the International Court of Justice. Michael Kugelman, Taha Siddiqui, appreciate both of you joining us and sharing your thoughts on a whole host of issues around this case. The Indian government, of course, has looked up to the International Court of Justice with hope that it can turn things around in the Kulbhushan Jadhav case. But what is the ICJ and how powerful is it? As we head into a break, here's a report that tells us more.
The International Court of Justice is the principal judicial organ of the United Nations. Since its setting up in April 1946, the ICJ has heard over 165 cases involving many of the 193 UN member countries. Located at the Peace Palace in Hague, the ICJ's main function is to settle legal disputes and give advisory opinions on issues faced by UN organs. Though the Jadhav case is being heard by a bench of 11 judges, the ICJ has a full bench of 15 judges hailing from different countries. The idea is to have representation from principal legal systems from across the world. Justice Dalveer Bhandari was appointed to the ICJ in 2012 and is the fourth Indian judge to be on the bench. The jurisdiction of the ICJ is a much debated topic in the Kulbhushan Jadhav case, with Pakistan claiming that it falls out of the ambit. The issue of jurisdiction is considered in two types of ICJ cases: contentious issues and advisory opinions. The Jadhav case falls under the contentious issue category. According to Article 36 of the statute, the most effective way in which the ICJ gains jurisdiction is when both parties agree. In situations where countries violate treaties or conventions, ICJ gains jurisdiction through the compromissory clause. Countries can also file conditional declarations accepting ICJ's jurisdiction in some cases. The procedure begins with the applicant writing a memorial laying down the basis of the court's jurisdiction and merits of its claims. The respondent can then either accept the jurisdiction and file its own memorial or can raise objections. Once the case is filed, the applicant seeks status quo pending hearing, like in Jadhav's case, prompting the ICJ to stay his execution. The Statute of the International Court of Justice is its main constitutional document. The judges can deliver joint judgments or pronounce separate opinions, but eventually the ruling is based on the majority. In case of an equal division, the President's vote becomes decisive. Francis Justice Ronnie Abraham is the current President of ICJ. there are fears that Pakistan might not adhere to the court's ruling. According to Chapter 14 of the UN Charter, the Security Council can enforce the court's rulings subject to veto by any of the 5 permanent members. In the Republic of Nicaragua versus the United States of America case, the ICJ ruled in favor of the former and awarded reparations too. The court ruled that the United States had violated international law by supporting a rebellion against the government of Nicaragua. But the US did not accept ICJ's jurisdiction and vetoed the enforcement of the judgment at the UN. As for the Kulbhushan Jadhav case, the hearing could go on for a long time before a decision is reached. India has built a strong case. The only worry is that China might come to Pakistan's aid and veto the enforcement of an adverse ruling. Bureau Report, WION.